The station didn't go into lockdown because of a weapon. It went into lockdown because the sensors detected a chemical threat, and the human was holding a mug. No one spoke when he walked in. That was normal. The break area wasn't designed for conversation, it was designed for neutral digestion. Subdued lighting, inert surfaces, humidity-controlled airflow, and a complete absence of olfactory stimuli. It was a place where species with vastly different dietary chemistries could exist near one another without, as one diplomat once put it, offending a lung or dissolving a trachea. Mateo Alvarez walked in anyway, humming something tuneless under his breath, and dropped his bag on the synthetic countertop with a soft thud. His badge marked him as logistics, but his gait had none of the urgency of someone wrangling priority manifests. He moved like it was early, too early, which it was. The work cycle had barely shifted into gear. The only other occupant, a slender, silver-skinned alien named Rethik, looked up from a nutrient column and froze mid-sip. Mateo offered a casual nod in greeting, then turned his attention to the counter. He unzipped the bag, pulled out a battered Earth-made coffee machine, and set it down like he was establishing a sacred altar. With methodical precision, he began the setup. Rethik narrowed both sets of eyes. Behind the walls, unseen by anyone in the room, the station's environmental sensors twitched. The unit was small, outdated by human standards, but it drew power from a modified universal port and began humming in protest. Mateo winced, gave it a sharp tap on the side, and continued. Inside the station's monitoring core, a subroutine flagged the electrical spike as non-native equipment activation. A second later, volatile compounds reached detectable levels in the air. The coffee grounds had been sealed in a vacuum-tight container. The moment he twisted it open, a dark, earthy aroma bloomed outward, rich, bitter, undeniably organic. To human nostrils, it was the smell of awakening. To the station's chemical profile matrix, it was a problem. 3 volatile organic compound thresholds tripped simultaneously. Across multiple sectors, alien personnel received quiet pings on their personal monitors, yellow-coded notifications of elevated aerosolized irritants. No alarms yet, just passive warnings. After all, it might be a malfunction, or something minor. A local leak, a calibration hiccup. Nothing about the readings suggested intentional aggression, at least, not yet. Mateo didn't notice. He was busy scooping coffee grounds by sight, ignoring the flimsy plastic spoon he'd taped to the brewer weeks ago. A small clatter as the container was set aside, then the hiss of a portable water unit coming online. Rethik set down the nutrient tube and stood. "Human Mateo," he said carefully. Mateo glanced over. "Morning?" Rethik hesitated. His species rarely interacted with humans outside official briefings or logistics handoffs. He had seen this particular human before, usually hunched over a datapad or muttering to himself about container volumes and docking misalignments. Never with this much smoke. Steam now curled lazily upward from the brewer. The scent intensified. The station's thermal sensors adjusted their parameters, but still the readings climbed. The room's temperature, technically unchanged, seemed warmer. Behind them, several systems flagged a chemical thermal convergence. The phrase chemical dispersal event appeared in 2 diagnostics. Not a warning yet, not a lockdown trigger, but close. Security protocols escalated to level 2. That was enough to summon medical personnel to an adjacent corridor, suited up and standing by. Containment doors primed, not sealed, just ready. Still, no audible alarms. No strobe lights, not yet. Mateo checked his wrist chrono, leaned forward, and tapped the side of the brewer. The sound echoed faintly metal on composite. He exhaled. His expression was that of a man who'd done this routine too many times in too many places that didn't understand the sanctity of caffeine. Steam billowed, rising like incense. The station's AI tried to cross-reference the activity with known human rituals. It failed. Too many contradictory signals. Calm posture, but active dispersal. Known irritants, but no protective gear. Ambiguous hand motions. It flagged the situation as potential hostile preparation. Ambiguous. Security teams were notified. 1 corridor away, weapons were removed from stasis. Still powered down. Still cradled, not aimed. Mateo sniffed the air approvingly. "I think I got the ratio right this time," he muttered to himself. Finally, Rethik had backed toward the doorway. Not out of fear, his species didn't express it like that, but from an abundance of caution. His outer dermis had begun reacting to the airborne compounds, signaling discomfort. The door slid open, and 2 security officers entered. One insectoid, with 4 arms folded across a vest of unpowered armor. The other, a serpentine being with filtered lenses and a voice modulator. Both paused just inside the threshold. The smell hit them instantly. The insectoid flinched. Matteo noticed them but didn't react. He lifted the brewer's carafe and poured dark liquid into a ceramic mug. That did it. The sensors screamed. High-density vapor spike. Active dispersal confirmed. Viscosity of liquid unknown. Heat signature matched projected thresholds for corrosive substances. Lockdown triggered. The outer doors sealed with a soft, unmistakable shunk. Across the corridor, red indicators began to pulse. Rethik darted out before the inner barrier dropped. The 2 security officers advanced, weapons now half raised. "Human," the serpentine one began. "You will step away from the device." Matteo blinked. "Device?" He turned slightly, mug in one hand, the empty grounds container in the other. He looked tired, mildly annoyed, not hostile, certainly not dangerous. The AI scrambled to interpret the gesture. The human raised the mug slowly and took a sip. All systems flared. Heat spike, ingestion of irritant, biological incompatibility predicted. Emergency med alerts were queued and dispatched in microseconds. But Matteo did not collapse. He closed his eyes, sighed through his nose, and nodded slightly. Perfect. Medical staff at the ready station stared at their monitors. No seizure, no cell rupture, no cardiac spike. In the command suite, a technician whispered, "Did he just drink it?" All at once, models began to collapse. The thermal plume was real, the chemical compounds were real, but there were no casualties, no signs of weaponization, no follow-up attack. Just a middle-aged human with a caffeine dependency. Matteo looked up at the security officers. "Was that for me?" They didn't move. "Sorry," he said, genuinely puzzled. "Did I do something?" The insectoid officer spoke in halting translation. "You are releasing substances, known irritants." Matteo tilted his head. "Coffee?" The AI flagged the word. "No threat match. Unclassified." The serpentine officer leaned forward, mask filtering steadily. "Explain." Matteo held up the mug. "It's a drink. From Earth. Keeps us awake. Bit of a ritual, honestly. I brew it every morning." The 2 officers didn't respond. Matteo squinted. "Do you want some?" The silence was profound. Slowly, one of the officers lowered their weapon. In the control suite, someone manually overrode the lockdown. Containment lifted. Status lights shifted from red to amber. Systems began recalibrating. Rethik peeked in through the now unsealed door and retreated instantly as another wave of coffee aroma rolled out. Matteo sipped again. "Look, if this is about the smell, I get it. You guys probably aren't used to this. Back on the mining colony at Delta 9, the head tech used to think it was mold." The serpentine officer exchanged a glance with the other and activated a secure comm line. "Reclassify incident. Non-lethal. Cultural behavior." Matteo, still oblivious, reached for a second mug from his bag. "I've got another one if anyone's feeling brave." He poured. The room remained quiet, save for the soft drip of residual brew. No one accepted the offer. But the war was over. Or rather, the one that hadn't happened. Behind the scenes, data was logged. Reports were drafted. Footage was marked and archived. And a new subroutine was quietly added to the station's monitoring core. Coffee. Earth origin. Alert threshold adjusted. Non-lethal to humans. Potentially destabilizing to non-humans. Monitor with caution. Matteo took another sip. Then, finally, he smiled. The coffee mug sat on the counter like a relic from a vanished civilization. Warm, innocuous, radiating that same deep, roasted aroma that had nearly triggered a station-wide lockdown just an hour earlier. Matteo didn't notice the residual tension still hanging in the air. He was reviewing inventory rotations on his handheld, quietly muttering about crate mislabels and a mislabeled delivery from Dock 3 that absolutely had to be Glen Marrow, no matter what the shipping manifest said. He took another sip of his drink and sighed through his nose. Why is it always Dock 3? Outside the break area, alien personnel were passing by in clusters, pausing at the corridor junction, peeking in and quickly walking on. No one entered. Inside the security hub, the footage was being replayed again, this time with commentary from 4 different departments. The lead medical officer, a feathery thin being from the Delcar species, insisted the incident required a formal xenotoxicity review. Security countered that it had been a simple misclassification. Translation: AI logs showed no aggressive intent. Environmental controls had resumed baseline readings. No permanent damage, no exposure injuries. But the diplomatic liaison, a tall, amphibian-like negotiator named Jirik, didn't look convinced. He ingested a Class 3 volatile compound, she said flatly, gesturing toward the footage. He consumed it, voluntarily, and then offered it to others, added the security analyst. The medical officer fluffed its dorsal plumage. Humans are chemically eccentric. This is known. Known? Jirik echoed. Not understood. Change coding. I grasped. A consensus formed. The human would need to be debriefed, carefully, and the beverage itself, catalogued, if not quarantined. Matteo was finishing his second cup by the time the diplomatic team arrived. He saw them enter the break area, 5 aliens walking with synchronized grace, their expressions ranging from neutral to mildly horrified. He raised his cup in greeting. Morning. The one in front, tall, broad-shouldered, reptilian skin flecked with green and violet, nodded politely. Human Matteo Alvarez. We request to discuss the event. Matteo blinked. The what? A brief pause, then. The beverage deployment. He lowered his cup slightly. Oh, the coffee? No one spoke. The silence pressed in. Matteo straightened, clearing his throat. Right. Sorry if that caused a scare. I didn't realize your sensors would, react like that. A smaller alien at the back, thin and chittering softly to itself, tapped at a portable scanner. Its eyes, 3 of them, blinking asynchronously, tracked the mug like it might leap off the counter and start attacking. It was not clearly labeled, said the lead diplomat. It's just coffee, Matteo said again, now more defensively. Ground roasted beans, from a plant, on Earth. It triggered over a dozen environmental warnings, the tall one replied. Heat dispersion, chemical release, aerosolized particulates. Because it's hot. That's how coffee works. It's brewed. Steam is part of the process. Steam. The word itself had become a minor terror in the diplomatic logs. Matteo held up both hands. Look, it wasn't a prank. It wasn't aggression. I was just trying to wake up. ATAs. The diplomatic team conferred in low voices, their translator devices humming. You intended to consume the beverage, the tall one clarified. Yes, gladly. The thin alien tapped its scanner again. Caffeine. Acidic profile. Aromatics inconsistent with known nourishment protocols. Matteo squinted. You're analyzing it? We are attempting to determine how a species evolved to ingest nerve stimulants in vapor form without self-harm. That's not what it's for, he said. It just tastes good. The stimulant part is a bonus. The diplomat narrowed its eyes. You did not consult safety protocol before introducing foreign volatile substances into shared airspace. Matteo rubbed the back of his neck. Right. Yeah, that's fair. I didn't think I had to file paperwork for a cup of coffee. The chittering analyst whispered something that translated as, classify as narcotic or psychological agent. Matteo nearly dropped his mug. It's not a narcotic. It's breakfast. The translator paused a beat too long before rendering breakfast, as if the station's linguistic core wasn't quite sure whether that term meant first meal or low-level explosive. The diplomat gestured to the counter. May we examine the device? Matteo hesitated, then stepped aside. They approached like archaeologists, confronting an unstable relic. The chittering one pulled a set of forceps from a pouch and gingerly lifted the ground's container. A rich new wave of scent escaped the open lid. All 5 aliens recoiled, 2 gagged. Okay, Matteo said, catching it midair before it dropped. Maybe don't smell it directly. The diplomat staggered a step back, pupils contracting. You willingly inhale this? Matteo looked into the container, then back at the team. Every morning since I was 15, the room fell still again. From the corridor, a low chime signaled a comm request. The diplomat tapped an earpiece, listened, then turned back to Mateo. "We require you to attend a debriefing with the cultural liaison board." Mateo blinked. "Now?" "Immediately." He looked longingly at the half-full mug, still steaming faintly. "Can I bring the coffee?" The team looked at one another. One of them began preemptively activating detox protocols. "You may bring the cup," the diplomat said with hesitation, "but do not operate the brewing device again. Deal." He picked up his bag, stashed the machine carefully inside, and followed them into the hallway, still sipping. The Cultural Liaison Board occupied a low-gravity annex near the center of the station's administrative ring. Designed to host representatives from over 24 species, the room was spherical and lined with modular platforms that adjusted position depending on the physiology of the participants. On this occasion, the entire room had been flattened into a horizontal layout, with only one occupied platform near the center. Mateo, sitting on a slightly too soft stool, cradling his now lukewarm coffee. Across from him, a semicircle of alien officials reviewed logs and whispered among themselves. At least 3 were wearing partial respiration masks. One had brought a portable air filter. "Let the record show," announced the lead official, "that this is a non-disciplinary inquiry into cross-cultural consumables and their unintended consequences. Answer bold. All the lest of..." Mateo nodded. "Understood. You do not contest the sequence of events as outlined?" "No, I brewed coffee." Sensors flipped out. Security showed up. I offered them a cup. That last part has been logged as unexpected escalation. Mateo raised an eyebrow. Escalation? To offer others participation in the consumption of an unknown compound is classified as a potential spread vector. I was just being polite. The official tapped a stylus against their terminal. Politeness has many forms. One of the assistants leaned in. "Human Mateo, can you list other common substances you routinely ingest that would trigger similar chemical alerts?" Mateo considered. "You mean like things that are safe for me but might freak out your systems?" "Correct." He ticked off on his fingers. Chocolate, alcohol, chili peppers, vinegar, some types of blue cheese, and that spicy mustard that makes your nose burn. The room reacted like he'd just listed an arsenal. The official raised a hand. "Are any of these currently stored aboard the station?" "Possibly. My ration box has a few things, but nothing dangerous. Not to me. To others, perhaps," the assistant murmured. Mateo frowned. "So what now? Am I banned from coffee?" The board fell into quiet deliberation. Finally, the lead official spoke again. "No, but it will require revised handling protocols, sealed environments, scheduled use, proper warning labels, and ideally, ventilation buffers." Mateo sighed. "Just for coffee?" "To prevent another near lockdown, yes." He sat back, holding his cup, staring into the swirl of settling grounds. "Well," he said at last, "I guess I'm making history. The reading never plays." The official made a note. "This incident will be archived under human cultural behaviors, ingestion patterns, subcategory, psychoactive mornings." Mateo tilted his head. "Seriously?" The room remained neutral. He sipped again. "Can I suggest a shorter title? You may file an addendum." Hours later, back in the break area, someone had added a small triangular sign next to the counter. "Caution. Human beverage preparation area, restricted olfactory zone." Mateo stared at it, bemused, and reached into his bag. The machine clicked softly as he plugged it in. The carafe rattled against its base. The hiss of water heating echoed faintly. The smell began to return. Rethik appeared in the doorway, eyes narrowed, scanning the air like a wary animal. "I put up a sign," Mateo offered. Rethik didn't move. "I also adjusted the vent settings and ran the process at 75% heat output. Should minimize the plume." The alien hesitated. Then, slowly, stepped inside. Steam rose, gentler this time. The smell still lingered, but less aggressively. Mateo filled a second cup, placed it on the counter near Rethik. No pressure, no comment. He turned back to his console, focused on supply logs. When he glanced back a few minutes later, the second cup was gone. The smell had become a subject of internal memos. Not just the smell, technically the presence, atmospheric diffusion pattern, and neurological impact vector of the smell. The updated phrasing, carefully curated by the Diplomatic Linguistics Division, was designed to avoid subjective terms like unpleasant or offensive. It was about neutrality now. Objectivity. Scientific classification of a scent that no one knew how to describe but everyone had an opinion about. Mateo Alvarez was oblivious to most of this. He just knew that the break area now had a dedicated air filter installed above his usual counter, a circular unit that turned on automatically the moment his coffee machine emitted its first hiss. He had offered to tone things down, switch to cold brew, maybe instant. The reaction from the station's human medical officer, Dr. Jamila Rhodes, had been swift and definitive. No, we are not giving up brewed coffee. It's the only thing keeping half of us upright by mid-cycle. Mateo had smiled at that, but it wasn't about defiance. It was about comfort, ritual. Even on a station filled with impossibly complex machinery and 12-meter insectoids that could smell sweat from 2 rooms away, sometimes a simple cup of coffee was the only familiar thing in sight. Still, not everyone had come around. Across the station's social network, a tangled feed of multilingual posts, curated logs, and AI-regulated opinion sharing the incident was trending. Tags like number volatile ritual, number human steam event, and number drink at your own risk cycled hourly. And in one of the higher-level diplomatic lounges, 2 alien ambassadors stared grimly at a screen replaying the footage of the first incident. Again, Ambassador Ketrin, a short amphibian diplomat with a voice that always sounded like a bubbling creek, clacked his fingers on the table in slow, frustrated rhythm. It's not a weapon. It's not a toxin. It's not even recreational. The other ambassador, Vosra of the Trian Exchange, a crystalline being with pulsing veins of bioluminescence, gave a soft tone that translated as mild incredulity. They ingest it for pleasure? Ketrin spread his webbed hands. Pleasure, alertness, cognitive enhancement. The human reports varying effects. Vosra's light shifted. And they offered it to others. Yes. Though to be fair, it appears the human in question did not anticipate the reaction. Vosra's crystalline tones turned darker. They rarely do. It wasn't just the coffee anymore. That was the troubling part. The incident had triggered a cascade of discussions across departments that rarely interacted. If humans could ingest things considered dangerous by standard biosafety protocols, what else might they do that defied logic, safety, or tradition? There were already reports from other sectors. One of the mining engineers had shared something called spicy jerky with a Zelari technician, resulting in a brief but violent episode of haptic system convulsions. A research analyst had gifted a sour candy to a Golem mathematician, who then spent 6 hours curled around a hydration node in what was later described as emotional sensory overload. And yet, the humans remained unharmed. Ambassador Vosra watched another loop of the footage. Mateo, calm, holding a steaming mug as if it were a holy artifact, sipping casually while the sensors panicked. We must reassess the safety compatibility profile of their entire species. Ketrin nodded solemnly. Agreed. Beginning with the brown liquid of awakening. Mateo wasn't asleep when the diplomatic summons came. He was in his quarters, trying to make sense of a shipping discrepancy involving 3 crates of Rowland starch paste, 2 mislabeled barrels of pressurized coolant, and 1 box ominously marked cultural artifacts. Fragile, may bite. The knock was polite, almost hesitant. A soft tone and a blinking hallway panel. He opened the door to find a small delegation waiting 3 species he hadn't seen much of, all wearing formal tokens and carrying tightly sealed data tablets. Mateo Alvarez, said the one in front, whose floating translation orb pulsed green with every word. You are invited to a cultural exchange summit regarding human ingestion protocols. He blinked. A what? The diplomat adjusted its shoulder band. A cross-species experiential forum for mutual understanding. Mateo glanced down at his bare feet, then back at the 3 waiting envoys. I need 10 minutes. And pants. The summit was held in Hall C-17, a neutral presentation dome usually reserved for interspecies lectures on topics like gravitational ethics in shared living spaces, or light-based communication for non-visual species. On this occasion, the seating arrangement had been modified to resemble a kind of observation arena. Mateo stood in the center, next to a sanitized table where his coffee machine had been set up under supervision. Every air vent within 10 meters was open and running at full capacity. Seated around the dome were dozens of observers, most of them silent, a few wearing protective membranes or lightly humming filtration bands. The lead diplomat raised a hand. Human Mateo. Please proceed. He looked around. You want me to make coffee? Like a demo? A chime translated as assent. All right. He moved with practiced ease. Scoop, pour, heat. The machine hissed. Steam rose. It wasn't even a strong brew. He'd watered it down, used a lighter roast, and run it through a secondary paper filter to trap any extra particulates. But still, the room shifted perceptibly as the aroma reached the first rose. Dozens of nostrils flared, tentacles twitched. A crystalline ambassador leaned slightly back in its seat. Mateo poured a mug. He didn't drink it yet. This, he said, is a morning ritual. Not a threat, not a challenge, just a habit. Like brushing your teeth or tuning a sensor. The translator paused before rendering brushing your teeth, briefly defaulting to self-dental abrasion. He held the mug. The smell is part of it. It tells us the day has started. It makes things feel normal. A few members of the audience shifted. A Tharn delegate raised a feeler. Why not use a capsule? A sealed infusion? No exposure? Some humans do, Mateo admitted. But that's missing the point. This isn't just about caffeine, it's about being human, about routine, about holding something warm and bitter and familiar when the rest of the world feels alien. Several heads turned at that. Slowly, he sipped. The reaction was muted this time. No sensor spikes, no alarms, but still, the room stiffened. He didn't wince, didn't flinch, just drank, calmly. A voice from the audience asked, "What does it feel like?" Mateo lowered the cup, thinking, "It feels like remembering who you are." The summit adjourned in subdued contemplation. No applause, no immediate consensus. But afterward, a few delegates lingered near the table, watching as the last drops cooled in the carafe. One asked to smell the grounds. Another requested a sample of the beans sealed, of course. A data-sharing request followed, then a translated copy of the brewing steps. The station's internal cultural index was quietly updated. Coffee. Human origin beverage, temperature variable, ingestion and olfactory exposure common, psychological impact, grounding, comforting, memory linked, status, culturally significant. Later that evening, Mateo returned to the break area. Rethik was already there, seated at the far end, sipping something from a squat mineral cylinder. He looked up as Mateo entered. The meeting was recorded, Rethik said. You were expressive. Mateo shrugged, setting his machine on the counter. Didn't expect to give a speech. I thought they'd ban the stuff. They nearly did. Steam began to rise again. The air filter above them hummed into action. I left out the part about espresso, Mateo said, grinning. Rethik tilted his head. Espresso? Mateo handed him a sealed packet from his bag. Like coffee, but stronger, denser, more intense. Rethik held it like it might vibrate. I will approach this cautiously. Mateo nodded. That's probably wise. Behind them, the corridor lights dimmed slightly, marking the beginning of rest cycle. The station fell into its usual quiet rhythm. But something had changed. Not a revolution, not a policy shift. Just a smell. Recognized now, tolerated, maybe even understood. And in a corner of the station, a human drank from a chipped ceramic mug, comforted by a flavor only he truly enjoyed, in a space that no longer panicked at the first sign of steam. The sign over the break area was no longer temporary. Someone, probably station maintenance, possibly a board engineer, had upgraded it to a sleek backlit panel, embedded directly into the wall above the counter. It now read, Human Beverage Zone. Warning. Elevated olfactory signature. Cultural activity in progress. Underneath, someone else had stuck a small paper note, handwritten in marker. Smells weird. Tastes worse. Somehow comforting. Mateo Alvarez chuckled when he saw it. He poured himself a cup from the half-full carafe, the steam curling lazily upward, and leaned against the counter like he did every morning now. But things had changed. Subtly. Quietly. Almost imperceptibly, unless you'd lived through the lockdown incident, which Mateo had. That had been 3 station cycles ago, long enough for the event to fade from emergency status and settle into legend. The chemical weapon that wasn't had become a cautionary tale in station briefings, a topic of study in cross-species onboarding modules, and somehow a mild punchline. But more importantly, it had started a conversation. And not just about coffee. Matteo sipped, watching the door. He wasn't waiting. Not exactly. But over the last few weeks, more and more non-humans had started drifting through the break area, some by accident, some clearly curious, some visibly bracing themselves for impact before entering. There had even been a request officially filed to observe a full brewing cycle without participating in inhalation. That one had come from a delegation of sensory-sensitive aquatic bipeds who wore damp cloths over their spiracles. Matteo had adjusted his settings accordingly. The mug in his hand was newer than the one from the incident. That original one had been retired, an honorific display item now mounted behind a sealed case in the diplomacy wing, complete with a small plaque. Mug of Matteo, first contact artifact, aromatic subtype, human cultural relay, station archive, number 01492. Matteo hadn't been invited to the unveiling, but someone sent him a photo. He'd laughed for a solid 10 minutes, then made another cup of coffee. Now, as he leaned back and let the smell fill the air, he wasn't surprised when the door opened. It was Rethik. The silver-skinned alien entered slowly, pausing just inside the threshold, like always. His species had a biological reflex to evaluate air composition before committing to full entry. Old instincts, older than cities. Rethik sniffed once, flared his nostrils slightly, then stepped forward. He was holding something in both hands. "Is that?" Matteo asked, squinting. "Yes," Rethik replied. "A beverage of my own culture, non-aerosol, cooled, bland, by your standards." Matteo smiled. Progress. They sat together, the human with his bitter steam and the alien with his thick mineral broth. Neither bothering the other. Silence settled. Not awkward. Companionable. "I've read 6 versions of the incident report," Rethik said after a few minutes. "No two agree on what happened." Matteo raised his mug. "That's because nobody knows what to do when a chemical threat turns out to be breakfast." Rethik made a low sound in his throat. Approval, maybe, or dry humor. The diplomatic board is still debating whether to assign a potential psychological destabilizer rating to coffee. "It is not now fashion in Ideas." "That feels a little dramatic," Matteo said. "You offered it during a perceived security threat. You ingested it in defiance of lockdown. Then you smiled." Matteo shrugged. "It was a good cup." A pause. Then Rethik added, "They may assign it level 2 cultural disruption potential." Matteo choked on his sip. "You're kidding." "I am not." The laughter bubbled out anyway. Quiet, then building. Rethik watched, impassive, before letting out a brief exhalation of his own, the alien equivalent of a chuckle. When it faded, Matteo looked at him. "Do they still think I was planning something violent?" "No," Rethik said. "Now they think you're part of a subtle propaganda initiative." Matteo blinked. "Because I offered coffee? Because others are now requesting it." He wasn't wrong. After the summit, several alien staff had requested controlled samples, strictly for scientific research, of course. But the pattern was unmistakable. A week later, someone from engineering had asked if they could replicate the brewing machine. For mechanical study, they said. And just last cycle, 2 junior diplomats had passed Matteo in the corridor and whispered, "Does it really taste like alertness?" before scampering off. He didn't know whether to be flattered or alarmed. Rethik sipped his drink. "They do not understand why it matters to you." Matteo looked down at his mug. "It's not the drink," he said. "It's the act. It's the ritual. Same motions, same smell, same temperature, even when nothing else is the same." He glanced around the sterile, steel, and polymesh break area. "You ever notice how nothing here smells like anything? Everything's filtered, cleaned, bleached. That's not bad. It's efficient. But it's not human." Rethik tilted his head. "Smell equates to memory for your kind." Matteo nodded. "Memory, meaning, home." Another pause. Then Rethik asked, "Is that why you refused to stop, even during the lockdown?" Matteo blinked. "I didn't refuse. I was just confused. The alarms hadn't gone off yet. You were all staring at me like I was about to explode, but all I had in my hands was hot water and ground beans. And a ceramic mug," Rethik said. Matteo grinned. "Which has now been enshrined." They both sipped again. At that moment, the door opened once more. Two aliens entered, a pair from the Cartari species, tall and bioluminescent, normally hesitant to share enclosed spaces with humans. They paused near the vent intake, eye lenses dilating, and then one stepped forward. "Is this the place where the ritual occurs?" it asked. Matteo set his mug down slowly. "Depends which ritual you mean." The second Cartari held out a small, flat object, like a serving tray, but with filter mesh layered over it. "We are prepared to attempt sensory acclimation." Rethik raised a brow ridge. "You're here to smell it?" "For research purposes," the Cartari said. "And because the junior envoys have been speaking of nothing else, for 2 rotations." Matteo looked down at his mug. Still warm, still steaming. He gestured toward the second clean cup near the wall. "You're welcome to observe," he said, "from a safe distance." The Cartari accepted, carefully placing the mesh tray between themselves and the cup like a shield against weaponized aroma. Then they sat. The break area began to feel strangely full. No tension, no panic. Just quiet companionship in a room that had once been the epicenter of diplomatic confusion. Matteo didn't say much after that. He didn't need to. The coffee spoke for itself now. That evening, back in his quarters, Matteo logged into the station's internal message board. A new discussion thread had appeared. Coffee Curiosity Club. Open session. The description read, "Weekly cultural review of Earth origin ingestion substances, focused on coffee and its social, psychological, and neurochemical properties. Limited sampling available. Non-humans welcome. Bring your own ventilation mask." Matteo stared at it for a long moment, then added a comment, "Happy to brew. See you all Thursday." He closed the message and glanced at the small shelf above his desk. There, sitting under soft light, was a replica mug someone had made on the fabrication printer. Same shape, same logo. But this one had a line of text etched around the rim in delicate multilingual script. "It's just coffee. Want some?" Matteo smiled and turned off the light. The scent of that morning's brew still lingered faintly in the air, a quiet reminder that sometimes the most human thing you can do in space is sip something strange, offer it to someone new, and call it home.